April 1945. A muddy field outside a shattered German town. Smoke rose from smoldering buildings, mingling with the cold spring air. Rows of wounded soldiers lay on stretchers, groaning softly, faces etched with exhaustion and fear. The fighting had left them broken, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Then through the haze, figures in crisp white uniforms appeared. American nurses moved swiftly between the stretchers, assessing injuries, administering bandages, and offering water. Their hands were steady, their voices calm, and their eyes held no trace of hatred. They treated every soldier the same, regardless of the uniform he wore. For the German prisoners, the sight was almost surreal. Tears welled in the eyes of men trained to believe the enemy was merciless. Here on this battlefield, kindness seemed impossible, yet it was real, deliberate, and unyielding. Each gentle touch, each soothing word challenged everything they had been taught about war. In that moment, humanity pierced the fog of battle. Broken men, once hardened by ideology and fear, discovered a truth far more powerful than propaganda. Even in war, compassion could survive. By early 1945, the German army was stretched to its limits. Months of continuous retreats, devastating Allied bombings, and relentless ground campaigns had left divisions depleted and exhausted. Soldiers moved through devastated villages and forests, often carrying the weight of fatigue, hunger, and fear alongside their weapons. The front lines were fluid, chaos replacing the rigid order that had once defined German military operations. Many of these men were no longer seasoned veterans but young recruits thrown into combat with minimal training. Morale was fragile, broken by propaganda that could no longer mask the reality of defeat. The Wehrmacht, once a symbol of discipline and strength, had become a patchwork of desperate units isolated and uncertain of reinforcements, supplies, or safe retreat. Amid this turmoil, countless soldiers were captured by advancing American and Allied forces. POWs were moved from the front lines to makeshift field hospitals or temporary camps. Conditions varied, but the physical and psychological toll was universal. Untreated injuries, infections, malnutrition, and exhaustion weighed heavily on men already drained by months of fighting. Many had witnessed the death of comrades, destruction of towns, and the relentless advance of a superior enemy. The Geneva Convention, to which the United States was a signatory, dictated humane treatment for prisoners of war. Yet adherence was not always automatic. It required deliberate effort and discipline, particularly under the stress of active combat. Field hospitals became critical zones where humanity was measured against chaos. Here, the wounded received care irrespective of ideology or nationality, and medical personnel, often overworked and under fire, had to balance efficiency with empathy. The American Medical Corps, trained rigorously in battlefield triage, faced the dual challenge of treating their own soldiers while tending to enemy POWs. Nurses, medics, and doctors moved between stretchers with practiced efficiency, their focus on life-saving interventions. Surgical procedures, wound cleaning, and administration of antibiotics or morphine had to be performed quickly yet carefully. Every act of care represented both a technical skill and a moral choice, a deliberate reinforcement of the rules of war even in its final, most brutal months. German prisoners entering these field hospitals were often skeptical, expecting harsh treatment or indifference. Rumors of Allied brutality circulated among retreating units, fueled by fear and wartime propaganda. Yet the reality in American facilities was starkly different. Wounded soldiers were assessed promptly, treated respectfully, and provided with food, water, and emotional support. The contrast was jarring. For men trained to see the enemy as merciless, such care was disorienting, provoking a mixture of relief, disbelief, and shame. By April 1945, the scale of American medical operations had grown immense. Casualties from both the European front and liberated areas flowed into hospitals across France, Belgium, and Germany. Nurses worked in relentless shifts, often sleeping only briefly before returning to care for the wounded. Their presence became a stabilizing force, a quiet reminder of humanity amid the devastation. For German prisoners, the experience of receiving care from these women marked a profound psychological shift. Physical pain persisted, yet it was now tempered by compassion. The rigid perception of the enemy, instilled over years of indoctrination, collided with undeniable kindness. In those moments, prisoners confronted a deeper truth. Even amidst destruction and ideology, human decency could endure. The scene in the field hospital was not merely a medical operation. It was a microcosm of wartime ethics, demonstrating that discipline, training, and compassion could intersect to create moments of profound moral clarity. The contrast between battlefield chaos and organized care highlighted the Allies' dual commitment to victory and to humane conduct. This tension between suffering, fear, and unexpected kindness set the stage for a deeper understanding of the human experience of war. For German prisoners, the arrival of American nurses was not simply a logistical necessity, but an emotional turning point, a confrontation with the enduring possibility of mercy in the darkest of times. By 1945, the United States had developed one of the most advanced and organized battlefield medical systems in history. The American Medical Corps, supported by the Red Cross and auxiliary organizations, operated with both efficiency and humanity, aiming to preserve life amidst the violence of war. Field hospitals were constructed near front lines, often under fire, with teams trained to stabilize, treat, and transport the wounded. Nurses, in particular, played a pivotal role. Young women from across the United States, many with limited prior experience, underwent rigorous training in triage, wound care, and emergency surgery. They learned to work with precision, moving swiftly through chaos, yet they were also taught to maintain empathy for every patient, regardless of nationality. Their mission was guided by both military orders and the principles of the Geneva Convention, which required humane treatment of all prisoners of war. The Red Cross provided additional support, ensuring that supplies, food, and medical equipment reached hospitals in a timely manner. Bandages, morphine, antibiotics, and surgical tools were stockpiled and transported across war-torn landscapes. Every item, every procedure, was coordinated to save lives and reduce suffering, whether the patient was an American soldier or a captured German combatant. Field hospitals became microcosms of humanity amidst destruction. Nurses and medics worked tirelessly, sometimes for 24-hour shifts, tending to soldiers maimed by artillery bullets and shrapnel. They faced extreme conditions, makeshift operating rooms, insufficient lighting, and constant noise from nearby bombardments. Yet in every procedure, they upheld the principles of care and compassion, a deliberate counterpoint to the brutality of war. For German prisoners, these hospitals were revelations. Men who had been trained to fear the enemy now found themselves met with calm hands and gentle words. Nurses treated wounds with meticulous care, applied bandages with patience, and administered pain relief without prejudice. Even when soldiers could not communicate in English, gestures, expressions, and the consistency of care conveyed respect and concern. The experience was profoundly disorienting. The enemy was not cruel, but compassionate. The psychological impact of this care cannot be overstated. Soldiers conditioned to distrust the Allies confronted kindness at a time of extreme vulnerability. The act of being treated humanely, provided food, clean bedding, and reassurance, contrasted sharply with the harsh realities of battlefield survival. For many, tears came unbidden, a release of fear, pain, and accumulated grief. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared in disbelief, witnessing an unexpected form of mercy. American medical personnel understood the significance of these encounters. Beyond preserving life, they recognized the power of humane treatment to foster compliance, reduce resistance, and maintain order among POWs. Medical ethics and military strategy intersected in these moments, demonstrating that compassion was both a moral duty and a practical necessity in managing the wounded and captured. The integration of humanitarian protocols into military operations reflected a broader commitment by the Allies. The Geneva Convention, meticulously observed, was not merely a legal obligation, but a guiding principle. Officers and nurses alike were trained to see every patient as a human being, deserving of dignity and care. This approach stood in stark contrast to the ideology of dehumanization that had pervaded the German war effort, particularly in its final months. In this context, German prisoners' emotional responses were not just individual reactions, but part of a broader moral confrontation. They faced the stark contrast between indoctrination and reality, brutality and mercy. The field hospital, a place of technical skill and human empathy, became a stage where the principles of civilization, respect, care, and ethical duty were enacted under the harshest conditions. By the spring of 1945, these hospitals were not merely treating injuries, they were shaping perceptions. Soldiers who might have remained hostile or fearful found themselves confronted with undeniable evidence of humanity. The compassion they experienced would resonate long after the war, influencing their understanding of enemies, ethics, and the complex human dimensions of conflict. War is defined by suffering, yet in the midst of destruction, moments of unexpected humanity can emerge. German prisoners, injured and exhausted, arrived at American field hospitals carrying both physical wounds and psychological burdens. They had witnessed death, destruction, and relentless Allied advances, conditioned to fear the enemy. Yet here, under bright lamps and gentle hands, they encountered care that defied expectation. Nurses moved among the wounded with calm precision. They administered morphine, cleaned burns and shrapnel wounds, and applied bandages, all while offering words of reassurance. For the soldiers, these gestures were profound. The rigid walls of indoctrination began to crumble as they experienced the absence of malice. Tears, once restrained by fear or pride, flowed freely. For many, it was the first moment in months, or years, when they felt safe, seen, and treated as human beings rather than adversaries. Psychologically, this care had immediate effects. Anxiety, anger, and suspicion gave way to trust, however tentative. Soldiers who had resisted authority or surrendered reluctantly found themselves cooperating with medical staff. Compassion became a bridge between former enemies, a reminder that even in war, basic human dignity could survive. The care provided to prisoners was not only moral but tactical. American Medical Corps faced the challenge of treating thousands of wounded soldiers under chaotic conditions, including both Allied and enemy casualties. Triage systems were implemented to prioritize treatment based on severity, balancing life-saving interventions with operational efficiency. Field hospitals were often located near front lines, requiring coordination with combat units for transportation, security, and supply delivery. Ambulances, stretchers, and medical teams had to navigate minefields, rubble-strewn roads, and enemy fire. Every wounded soldier treated represented both a life saved and a potential reduction in battlefield disruption. For German POWs, this system was both bewildering and reassuring. Their survival depended not only on the nurses' skill, but also on the efficiency of the logistics behind the scenes. Supplies of antibiotics, bandages, and surgical equipment had to be continuous and timely. The meticulous planning of these operations reflected a combination of compassion and strategy, demonstrating that moral action in war could coexist with tactical necessity. Technology amplified the effectiveness of American medical care. Field hospitals were equipped with mobile surgical units, sterilization devices, and specialized tools that allowed rapid intervention on serious injuries. Morphine and penicillin were used systematically, reducing pain and preventing infection. Even in the chaos of combat zones, nurses could perform complex procedures, stabilizing patients for transport to larger hospitals if necessary. German prisoners were often struck by the sophistication of these techniques. Wounds that might have proved fatal in earlier conflicts were now treated successfully. Splints, antiseptics, and surgical techniques had evolved to maximize survival and minimize suffering. Equipment like portable X-ray machines allowed accurate diagnosis, while anesthesia enabled more extensive surgical interventions. The technological capacity of the American Medical Corps was inseparable from its human and tactical dimensions. Advanced equipment allowed nurses to perform life-saving work efficiently, even under extreme conditions. For prisoners, this combination of skill and technology deepened the emotional impact, reinforcing the perception that the enemy could act with professionalism, humanity, and competence simultaneously. The convergence of human empathy, tactical efficiency, and technological innovation created a powerful experience for German POWs. Beyond immediate medical outcomes, it reshaped perceptions, challenged assumptions, and forged a fragile trust between former enemies. Providing care to enemy soldiers required deliberate decisions at multiple levels of command. American military leaders recognized the dual imperatives of saving lives and maintaining order among POWs. Field hospitals were staffed and organized not only for operational efficiency, but with a moral framework that prioritized humane treatment. Commanders established clear protocols. Nurses and medics were instructed to treat all wounded soldiers equally, without prejudice. Orders emphasized discipline, vigilance, and compassion simultaneously, balancing security concerns with ethical responsibility. Officers coordinated with supply units to ensure continuous availability of medical supplies, anticipating surges of casualties from both Allied and enemy forces. Leadership extended to the battlefield as well. Ambulances, stretcher teams, and triage personnel were deployed with precision, ensuring that wounded German soldiers were quickly moved from combat zones to safe treatment areas. These logistical decisions were informed by both strategic necessity and humanitarian principles. Leaders understood that effective care could prevent unnecessary deaths, reduce battlefield chaos, and foster psychological stability among prisoners. The impact of this leadership was profound. German prisoners witnessed a structured, disciplined system that contrasted sharply with the disorder and fear they had experienced in retreat. The competence of American command, combined with the visible kindness of nurses, reinforced trust and compliance, illustrating that authority could coexist with humanity even in the crucible of war. The treatment of wounded German soldiers was an exercise in moral courage. Nurses and medics faced the challenge of extending compassion to men trained to fight against them. Prejudices, fears, and deep-seated enmities had to be set aside in favor of professional ethics and adherence to the Geneva Convention. Each act of care was a deliberate moral choice: to bandage a wound, provide pain relief, or offer reassurance. For many nurses, it was emotionally taxing to treat soldiers who might have killed or injured fellow Americans. Yet their training, discipline, and personal commitment to humanitarian principles guided them. The result was a powerful demonstration of ethics prevailing over ideology. German prisoners, experiencing care without expectation of reward or reciprocity, were confronted with a moral paradox. The enemy, long demonized, acted with compassion, challenging assumptions about honor, humanity, and the rules of war. Tears, gratitude, and quiet reflection became common reactions, highlighting the profound psychological and moral impact of this care. Beyond immediate battlefield considerations, the American approach reflected broader ethical imperatives. Field hospitals were spaces where human dignity was preserved despite the chaos of combat. Soldiers, stripped of weapons and rank, were treated as individuals rather than abstract enemies. This ethical stance carried strategic consequences. Humane treatment fostered trust, reduced resistance among POWs, and minimized incidents of violence or unrest. Moreover, it set a precedent for post-war reconciliation, demonstrating that even amidst total war, adherence to moral principles was possible. Compassion became both a guiding ethic and a practical instrument, influencing behavior, morale, and the perception of the Allies among captured soldiers. The ethical framework extended beyond the hospital walls. Commanders and nurses understood that their actions would be remembered by survivors, shaping perceptions of the United States and its values long after the war ended. The careful balance of morality and military necessity became a defining feature of these operations, illustrating that ethical conduct could coexist with strategic objectives. The convergence of leadership, moral courage, and ethical practice created a powerful, transformative experience for German prisoners. Care that was both technically competent and morally grounded began to erode fear, resentment, and distrust. Soldiers who had anticipated cruelty now faced an unexpected humanity that challenged their assumptions and reshaped their perceptions of the enemy. April 1945, a makeshift field hospital outside a shattered German village. Wounded soldiers were carried over muddy terrain, their uniforms torn, faces smeared with blood and dust. Many had been on the front lines for weeks, living on hunger, fear, and exhaustion. They expected hostility. Rumors of Allied vengeance had circulated through the retreating units. Some anticipated neglect. Others feared cruel treatment. Yet what they found was entirely different. White-clad nurses moved swiftly, assessing wounds, offering water, and speaking in calm, reassuring tones. Their hands were steady, their touch deliberate. Every soldier, whether American or German, received the same careful attention. Bandages were applied meticulously, splints adjusted, morphine administered. The nurse's efficiency was paired with empathy, a combination that left prisoners disoriented. One young German soldier, barely 19, broke down as a nurse cleaned a deep gash across his shoulder. He had fought, retreated, and endured unimaginable hardship, yet the gentleness of her touch stirred tears he could not contain. Another, missing a foot to shrapnel, whispered a stunned question. "Why are you helping me?" The answer was simple, though unspoken. Human life mattered regardless of uniform. The nurses worked tirelessly, moving between stretchers and operating tables, their presence steady amidst chaos. Each soldier treated became a testament to a quiet moral power, an assertion that compassion could survive even in war. The patient's eyes, once wary and mistrustful, began to soften. Fear gave way to relief, resentment to cautious gratitude. For many, it was a profound psychological shift. Soldiers who had expected cruelty now experienced care, and in that care, a confrontation with their own preconceptions. Propaganda had painted the enemy as merciless, but reality proved otherwise. The nurse's deliberate kindness pierced through indoctrination, leaving prisoners questioning the assumptions that had guided them through months of retreat. In the operating tent, surgeons worked on severe injuries with precision, while nurses provided steady reassurance. Shrapnel was removed, burns treated, and fractured limbs set. The combination of medical skill and human empathy was transformative. Soldiers whispered thanks, wiped tears, or simply stared, absorbing the unprecedented experience. By evening, word spread among the prisoners. Fearful whispers of "they are kind, they treat us well" circulated, a stark contrast to the terror that had marked their retreat. For officers and enlisted men alike, the experience became a turning point, a moment when the veneer of the enemy as merciless was irrevocably cracked. This first encounter was not merely a medical procedure, it was a moral and psychological intervention. Compassion acted as a weapon, subtle yet devastating to entrenched assumptions. Soldiers who had surrendered reluctantly began to cooperate willingly, trusting in the fairness and care they experienced. The battlefield had taught them fear, the nurses, humanity. By nightfall, the field hospital was filled with quiet gratitude and tears. Men who had braced for brutality found themselves confronted by empathy. The emotional impact was profound. Courage, fear and pain intertwined with relief, trust, and the dawning realization that even in war, humanity could prevail. This first contact with kindness set the stage for deeper transformation, reshaping perceptions and building fragile bonds that would influence prisoners' attitudes long after they left the hospital. It marked the beginning of a silent revolution of the heart, where compassion, not force, became the agent of change. In the days following their arrival, German prisoners began to settle into the rhythms of the field hospital. Initially cautious, many lingered at the edge of the wards, watching nurses move among patients, observing the quiet efficiency with which they treated injuries. The initial shock of unexpected kindness began to give way to curiosity, then cautious engagement. One officer, hardened by years on the Eastern Front, observed nurses tending a young enlisted man whose leg had been shattered by artillery. The patient winced with pain, yet the nurse's calm presence seemed to ease both physical suffering and anxiety. The officer, trained to expect cruelty, felt a dissonance he could not reconcile. Slowly he approached, accepting assistance for a minor injury on his hand. The act, small and personal, became a bridge between enemy and caregiver, fear giving way to trust. As more soldiers received care, patterns emerged. Nurses remembered names, addressed patients politely, and maintained consistent routines. Even language barriers could not diminish the sincerity of gestures, smiles, and careful instructions. Prisoners began to anticipate kindness, sometimes asking for minor comforts or assistance without hesitation. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Fear was replaced by cautious confidence, skepticism by a fragile sense of security. The field hospital itself became a space of transformation. Soldiers who had been suspicious of Allied intentions began to share small stories, jokes, and experiences. Simple acts, a nurse adjusting a pillow, offering a sip of water, or wiping sweat from a brow, carried profound emotional weight. For men conditioned to distrust the enemy, each gesture was evidence that humanity could survive even in war. Medical procedures continued, yet their significance expanded beyond treatment. Surgeries, wound cleaning, and rehabilitation were not only acts of survival, but lessons in empathy. Prisoners began to observe teamwork, discipline, and moral dedication in ways that contrasted sharply with the chaos and brutality of their own experiences. Respect and admiration grew silently among those who had expected only hostility. By the end of the first week, the atmosphere had shifted remarkably. German soldiers, once tense and fearful, now displayed tentative cooperation. Officers who had initially resisted authority submitted to medical guidance without argument. Enlisted men, previously withdrawn or combative, engaged with nurses and staff. Tears, quiet gratitude, and whispered thanks became common in the wards. The psychological transformation was profound. Men who had surrendered under duress experienced a validation of their basic humanity. The consistent kindness of the nurses challenged decades of indoctrination, forcing prisoners to reevaluate not only the enemy, but also their own preconceptions about morality, duty, and honor. Compassion had become a form of authority, commanding obedience and eliciting trust without coercion. Leadership within the hospital recognized this shift. Officers and nurses understood that treating prisoners humanely was not merely ethical, but strategic. Trust reduced incidents of unrest, improved recovery, and fostered an environment in which soldiers could cooperate in evacuation, hygiene, and rehabilitation. Humanity and efficiency were intertwined, each reinforcing the other. By mid-April, the field hospital had become a haven of unexpected peace. German prisoners, once hardened by ideology and fear, now engaged with the caregivers openly. Their initial skepticism had transformed into a recognition that the enemy could act with integrity and empathy. The realization was both humbling and emotional. Men who had braced for cruelty now wept at the sight of care, experiencing a profound mixture of relief, shame, and gratitude. This climax, where fear gave way to trust, was more than a moment of personal revelation. It symbolized the enduring power of human kindness in war. Even amidst devastation, exhaustion, and ideological enmity, empathy could reshape perceptions, restore dignity, and create bonds that transcended uniform and allegiance. In the days following their first encounters with American nurses, German prisoners displayed a quiet but profound transformation. Men who had expected hostility now navigated the wards with a mixture of curiosity and cautious gratitude. The initial shock of kindness had given way to acceptance and, in some cases, emotional release. Tears, once restrained by fear or pride, became a common response to relief and care. The field hospital, initially a place of triage and survival, had evolved into a microcosm of moral influence. Nurses and medics, through consistent demonstration of empathy and skill, reshaped prisoners' understanding of the enemy. Soldiers who had been suspicious or defiant began cooperating willingly, following instructions, assisting in small tasks, and adhering to hospital routines. This compliance was not enforced through fear or threat, but earned through the deliberate cultivation of trust. Medical outcomes improved as well. Soldiers who might have otherwise resisted treatment now allowed proper care, reducing infection, accelerating recovery, and stabilizing serious injuries. Triage systems operated more efficiently, as cooperation between patients and staff minimized delays in surgery and wound care. Even minor acts, like helping to adjust bedding or delivering food trays, became part of the rehabilitation process, reinforcing dignity and agency for the wounded. For American personnel, the impact was equally significant. Nurses and medics witnessed the transformative power of humane treatment firsthand. Their efforts validated months of rigorous training, demonstrating that discipline and compassion could coexist in high-stress environments. Morale among medical staff improved as well. The tangible effect of their care on prisoners' emotional and physical well-being created a sense of purpose beyond simple duty. Commanders and administrators observed operational benefits too. POW compliance reduced the risk of unrest and allowed hospitals to focus on efficiency rather than security concerns. Supplies, movement, and treatment schedules could be maintained without additional personnel for supervision or enforcement. The ethical treatment of enemy soldiers became a force multiplier, reinforcing the strategic and humanitarian dimensions of military medical operations. Beyond the hospital walls, word spread among newly captured prisoners. Accounts of the nurses' care circulated through POW groups, fostering cautious optimism among men en route to other facilities. The reputational impact of humane treatment extended beyond individual wards, influencing morale and behavior in broader POW populations. Soldiers began to anticipate care rather than punishment, a shift that had tangible effects on their psychological resilience and cooperation. The emotional resonance of these interactions left lasting impressions. Men who had endured months of fear, exhaustion, and indoctrination experienced relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of self-worth. Small gestures, a steady hand, a kind word, or the administration of pain relief, became transformative acts, reaffirming that even in war, compassion could survive. In parallel, logistical systems adapted to support this humane approach. Supplies of antibiotics, bandages, and surgical materials were prioritized, and triage protocols incorporated consideration of psychological as well as physical needs. Nurses documented patients' progress carefully, ensuring that each soldier received continuous care. This attention to detail reinforced both operational efficiency and moral responsibility, creating a feedback loop in which compassion and practicality reinforced one another. By the end of the first week, the field hospital had become a space where survival, recovery, and humanity intersected. German prisoners, once hardened and fearful, now navigated the environment with growing trust and compliance. The immediate consequences were clear: improved medical outcomes, operational efficiency, reduced tension, and a profound psychological shift among the wounded. Weeks passed, and the German prisoners' initial shock of kindness solidified into lasting perception. For many, the experience of humane treatment had become a defining memory of the war. Men who had endured fear, indoctrination, and relentless combat found themselves reflecting on the paradox. The enemy they had been trained to hate had acted with empathy and integrity. The impact extended beyond physical recovery. Soldiers' psychological states improved markedly, reducing anxiety, depression, and hostility. This newfound sense of security and trust facilitated smoother processing in POW camps, eased integration into structured routines, and encouraged cooperation in rehabilitation programs. The emotional transformation of the prisoners was not merely incidental. It was a direct consequence of deliberate, consistent care that acknowledged their humanity. Reports from the field hospitals emphasized the moral and operational benefits of this approach. Nurses' careful documentation, coupled with officers' observations, highlighted reductions in unrest, improved compliance, and enhanced morale. The humane treatment of prisoners demonstrated that ethical action could coexist with strategic objectives, and in fact, strengthen them. German soldiers, having witnessed compassion firsthand, were more likely to adhere to orders, accept medical treatment, and navigate the challenges of captivity with dignity. This legacy extended even further. Soldiers returning to their units or camps carried the memory of kindness with them, sharing stories of care, empathy, and professionalism. Such accounts contrasted sharply with the narrative of cruelty and vengeance that had dominated wartime propaganda. Over time, these experiences reshaped perceptions of the Allies among German POWs, planting seeds of understanding that would influence post-war interactions and reconciliation. The broader historical significance was equally profound. The American commitment to humane treatment illustrated the practical application of the Geneva Convention under extreme circumstances. Hospitals, nurses, and medical protocols became a model for integrating ethical imperatives with operational necessity. Compassion was not incidental. It was structured, intentional, and effective, a demonstration that moral action could achieve both humanitarian and strategic goals. For the prisoners themselves, the memory of care often became transformative. Soldiers who had entered the hospital hardened and fearful left with a deeper understanding of the complexity of human behavior in war. Many later recounted these experiences as pivotal moments, marking the first time they truly reconciled the concept of the enemy with the reality of shared humanity. Tears shed in the hospital, whispered words of gratitude, and moments of silent reflection endured long after the physical wounds had healed. The emotional resonance also affected the caregivers. Nurses and medical staff observed that their actions, grounded in ethical and professional standards, could fundamentally alter attitudes and behavior. This realization reinforced the importance of discipline, empathy, and dedication not just in medical practice, but as a moral framework capable of shaping outcomes in wartime. In retrospect, the field hospitals became arenas where morality, strategy, and psychology intersected. Compassion functioned as a tool of influence, demonstrating that human dignity could survive amidst chaos. For German prisoners, these encounters redefined their understanding of both the enemy and themselves, creating a legacy that transcended the immediate context of injury and treatment. The convergence of kindness, professionalism, and ethical responsibility left a permanent mark on those who witnessed it. German soldiers, once fearful and hardened, carried forward lessons of empathy and shared humanity. The hospitals, nurses, and medical corps exemplified the enduring power of moral action in the most extreme conditions, leaving an imprint that resonated long after the war ended. The experience of German prisoners in American field hospitals was more than a moment of wartime care. It was a profound testament to the enduring power of humanity. In the midst of destruction, exhaustion, and fear, men trained to see their captors as merciless were met with compassion, skill, and dignity. For the wounded soldiers, these encounters challenged assumptions, reshaped perceptions, and restored a sense of self-worth often stripped away by combat and ideology. Nurses, medics, and medical staff acted not out of convenience or expectation of reward, but from deliberate adherence to ethical principles. Their work demonstrated that discipline, professionalism, and empathy could coexist even under the most extreme conditions. Every bandage, every administered dose of morphine, every word of reassurance was a quiet assertion that human life mattered, regardless of uniform or allegiance. The ripple effects were profound. Soldiers who had feared cruelty found themselves trusting their caregivers, cooperating willingly, and experiencing psychological relief alongside physical healing. The operational efficiency of hospitals improved, morale stabilized, and the broader perception of the Allies among POWs shifted. Compassion became both a moral and strategic force, showing that ethical conduct could influence outcomes as powerfully as any weapon. Beyond the immediate war zone, the legacy endured. Soldiers carried memories of kindness long after returning to camps or their homes, stories that challenged entrenched narratives of enmity and cruelty. The field hospital stood as proof that even amidst total war, empathy, integrity, and human dignity could prevail. Ultimately, this story serves as a reminder that the most profound victories in war are not always measured by territory gained or enemies defeated, but by the preservation of humanity. In the gentle hands of nurses and the steadfast commitment of medical personnel, wounded soldiers discovered an unexpected truth. Even in the darkest hours, compassion survives, shapes lives, and leaves an enduring imprint on history. The tears, gratitude, and trust of those German prisoners were not signs of weakness but proof that the human spirit can respond to kindness with resilience and hope. In the echo of these quiet moments, the war revealed not only its horrors but also the enduring possibility of decency, even between enemies.